Hello everyone and welcome back to LycanhoodReads. My name's Michaela and I'm coming at you today with a spooky Sapphic book recommendations video. It's sort of the middle of September and this is normally the time of year that I would come at you with a TBR for my spooky season reads. And while I do still plan to be reading, as many spooky books as I can for the season, I don't really have a super clear vision of what the next couple months are going to be like. As far as life and as far as reading. My reading tastes have been sort of all over the place this year, especially the last few months. So I've just been leaning into the mood reading and not really trying to pressure myself with TBRs too much. So I thought doing just a plain old recommendations video for the spooky season would probably be a better fit. And today I'm coming at you with just Sapphic book recommendations because rather than just doing a recommendation video of all the spooky queer books that I've read or heard about, I just wanted to do ones that I had already read and I really, really enjoyed so that it could be the most positive sort of recommendation video. Later in the month, I might do a more inclusive video of just sort of generally queer books that I've either read already or heard about or want to be reading this season. But for this one, it's just going to be spooky books that have some sort of Sapphic element to them, whether it be just a Sapphic character, a Sapphic side character, or a Sapphic relationship at the center of the book. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. The first two books I'd like to recommend to you are going to be two YA titles. I thought I'd split the list into YA and adult. So, to start off, it's going to be a book that I actually just read last month in August because I simply couldn't wait for spooky season to officially start, and that would be Not Good for Maidens. It has a totally fantastic cover. The cover immediately drew me in, and I was like, I have to read that book. I'm so excited about it. I think it came out last month in August too, so just in time for the fall, and I read it pretty much immediately and loved it. I put up a whole review on my channel for that book. In general, I loved it, really liked it, perfect for the season. It was good for a YA book, it was good for a Sapphic book. It kind of hit all of the notes that it was going for, I think. It was spooky in this sort of dreadful way. So, Not Good for Maidens is about this family of witches from York who have been sort of cursed, or at the very least assigned the task of taking care of the city of York, which is riddled with goblins, and which is visited every summer by the Goblin Market, which is this sort of alternate dimension realm that comes once a year in the summer for a few months, and they kidnap, torment, and eat the people of York, mostly the young people of York. So this is based off of a poem called The Goblin Market that's very fairy tale-esque about, being swept away, lured, and seduced into the Goblin Market where terrible things happen. In this book, the main character, Lou, is from this family of witches, but she doesn't know that. Some drama went down in the past with her aunt that resulted in her mother, and her aunt all living in America for the majority of her life until her older cousin gets taken into the market and they all have to go back to York in order to rescue her. There's a little bit more to it than that. There is a Sapphic romance between the main character's aunt and a goblin girl. There's a dual timeline from between the present, which is dealing with Lou, and then the past where the Sapphic romance is happening and all the drama that went down that caused them to leave York in the first place. It hits all the vibes. It's creepy, it's dreadful, there's a lot of body horror, there's a lot of flesh eating, and flowers growing out of your skin and vines and creeping and all that sort of stuff. Dismemberment, there's a fair amount of dismemberment. I talk about it more in depth in that review video, so I'll just leave it at that. But basically, this is a perfect read for spooky season. It is YA, but I think any adult fantasy reader or anyone that likes fairy tales or fairy tale retellings could find something to enjoy about this book. Next is one that you probably already heard me talk about a few times if you've been following my channel since last year. It's called The Dead and the Dark. That is going to be about Courtney Gould. And I absolutely fell in love with this YA Sapphic murder mystery supernatural thing last year. I read it last October for my spooky season TBR, and it totally won me over. My expectations weren't that high, but the cover is fantastic. How could I ignore that cover? And so I didn't go into it with very high expectations, and it really just blew me away. So just sort of the basic premise of this is that the main character, her dads run this sort of fake investigative like Discovery Channel show about ghost hunting. You know the ones. They run that sort of channel. They've been doing it for, I don't know, most of her life, I guess, for a long time. They're very successful at it. And because of that, they travel across the country a lot, you know, investigating these different mysteries, these different cases and haunted places and things like that. Well, at the beginning of the book, they just sort of upheave this girl's entire life and move her back to the town that they are originally from, where they grew up, to investigate a murder mystery that has happened there recently, where a young teenage boy has gone missing and the town is being torn apart by it. The love interest and the other perspective for that book is this teenage girl, it's her boyfriend is the one that has gone mysteriously missing. And she doesn't know that she's, you know, bisexual or sapphic yet, but she's caught up in her grief about him and in her rage and frustration about his mysterious disappearance. She doesn't know if he's dead or not. She feels haunted by him, regardless of if she believes he's dead or not. And so she starts investigating herself. And of course, these two storylines eventually converge as they team up to solve the mystery of the spooky, supernatural being, entity, force that is sort of attacking this town. And it just turned out really well. I kind of hope that I have time to reread it this year just because I read it so quickly and enjoyed it so much, and I feel like it's a thing that I would like to experience again every October, the same way that you might watch like Hocus Pocus or Halloween Town, or in my case, the Fear Street movies. So hopefully I get a chance to reread that one. I highly recommend it. Alright, moving right along into my adult picks. Those were the only YAs that I picked up. Not because there weren't more spooky YA stuff out, especially last year I felt like there was a lot, but I'm not really leaning towards YA reading lately. The last couple of years I've been leaning way more towards adult, so those are the only two I have for YA. Jumping right into my adult recommendations. First up is going to be Plain Bad Heroines. Now, I read this towards the beginning of the year, I think in January, and loved it. I wish I had been able to read it during spooky season, but honestly, the vibes hit all year round. This one's a little bit harder to sum up in a quick little summary of the plot, but basically you're looking at really creepy, a little bit goth academia vibes, but also like haunted Hollywood vibes. There are multiple POVs in this book, all of them sort of revolving around this film that's being made about this old school that is rumored to be haunted in like the northeast of the United States somewhere. I don't remember the exact place. So this haunted boarding school that's been all shut up and shut down for half a century, someone in Hollywood has decided to make a movie about it. So the main perspectives consist of the person that wrote the book about this haunted place that the film is going to be loosely based off of, the girl that wrote the book, and also the superstar lesbian celebrity that is going to be starring in the movie. And lastly, back in the timeline that the haunting originally began, so like the mid-19th century when the school was first open, there's a perspective from that timeline as well. So there's a lot of creepy, crawly, ghosty stuff happening here, a lot of body horror for sure, and just sort of psychosis. The atmosphere for this book just really slaps, and the dialogue is fantastic as well. Something I think I said in one of my original reviews for this book back in January was that I just loved listening to the characters talk to each other, or reading about the characters talking to each other. I loved the way they spoke to each other, and just the conversations would go in these really weird directions, and I absolutely adored the dialogue. The atmosphere is creepy, and it's Hollywood, and it's dark academia, and it's the mid-19th century, and it's so good. The sapphic elements of it, not only are some of the characters sapphic, but the relationship dynamics that kind of get woven up and twisted into these characters is interesting. It's definitely not your traditional love story at all. Don't go into it looking for a love story. It's just weirdness. Some weird, cool dynamics that are just fun to explore. In general, you can just go into this looking for like a haunted movie set and a haunted school sort of storyline. I think one of my biggest complaints was about the past storyline that takes place in the mid-19th century. Those parts were a little bit less compelling. I wasn't as invested in the characters. And just kind of given the time period, I felt like it was a little bland or boring. But that could just be me. I don't really love stuff from that time period, so no big surprise there. But I'd also say one of my biggest complaints is that not a lot actually happens in the school. So when I say dark academia, take that with a very small grain of salt, because the school, while it is in some part the setting to a lot of this book, it doesn't really feel like we're in the school very much. And we're not often one of the students or one of the teachers in the school. We're not often on site for the hauntings in that capacity. So it's not hardcore dark academia, but I find that that's a hard genre to nail down anyway. Next is going to be The Drowning Girl by Caitlin R. Kiernan, which is the author of the Alabaster comic book series, which I have enjoyed for many years. This is actually the first novel that I've read by her. Mostly I've just read her comic book stuff, but she's a very prolific writer and has been since the 90s, writing novels, writing a lot of comic books, and even more short stories, like over 200 short stories. So I would like to read more by her. I plan to kind of vaguely in the future. But this is the book I started with. The Drowning Girl is about a schizophrenic trans woman who is dealing with some strange events in her personal life. She begins to struggle to discern the difference between reality and her delusions when she has a late night encounter during a late night drive with a ghost. Or maybe not a ghost. Maybe just delusion. She's not sure. This book is super weird and definitely isn't going to be for everyone. The writing style it's a bit like we're reading her diary or her journals, so the writing style is just as unreliable as the character herself, given her psychosis and her mental state. So you're not always going to be sure what's real or what's happening, and it can be very twisty, but not in a way that I found grating. I found that it was easy to just flow with the stream of consciousness of the narrative and just kind of let myself fall into those psychotic moments. And I think that is really just a good testament to the writer, making me feel comfortable enough where this wasn't confusing in a way that I found frustrating. It's a super unique read. It does have sapphic elements. It's got that trans representation. And just the spooky ghost vibes are hitting it at every level. You don't know if this girl is truly being haunted or if it's just her own mental health taking its toll on her. And it's really just a fun ride, to be honest. You've all probably heard of this one, doesn't need much introduction, but the Locked Tomb trilogy by Tamsyn Muir, of course, begins with Gideon the Ninth. I don't know how we talk about a Halloween or a spooky season TBR without talking about Gideon the Ninth. While I don't particularly find this series to be scary, I do find it to be creepy and just my favorite kind of horror, which is horror that isn't afraid to be a little bit silly as well. Of course, Gideon the Ninth and Harrow the Ninth have been out for a while, but this month in September we're also getting Nona the Ninth, so it might just be the perfect time for the Locked Tomb to be reread, the whole trilogy, or if you just want to jump into Nona the Ninth like me, I can't wait to get to it. If for some reason you don't know what the Locked Tomb trilogy is, I can just tell you that it is about lesbian necromancers in space. So you've got sword lesbians trapped in this sort of Clue-esque situation where they're in this house and people start dying left and right. They gotta solve mysteries and trapdoors and puzzles. And the two main characters, Gideon and Harrow, have this sort of enemies to lovers dynamic where at first they seem to hate each other with the deepest blazing hells of passion, and then as it goes on, their banter is delicious and they just grow to care about each other over time in this deeply seated way that's twisted and fascinating. I don't know much more to say about that. But there's a sword lesbian, there is a lesbian Gothic necromancer girl that's always sad and always mean. And then in the second book, it just will blow your mind. Harrow the Ninth takes everything from Gideon the Ninth and cranks it up to 11, and it just dares you to either keep up or be left behind. And last but not least, I want to talk about Meddling Kids by Edgar Cantero. which is another book that I really went crazy for last spooky season. This is a weird one, you guys. Meddling Kids is sort of like a Scooby-Doo-esque spoof. It's about a very Scooby-like gang. They even have a dog. He doesn't talk, but they sometimes pretend that he does. That when they were kids, they used to be famous for solving mysteries. Like a little club, you know? And this book starts when they all return back to their hometown after years of being away and drifting apart. They come back as adults to solve the one mystery that got away from them. And this mystery is the one that turns out to be real. Rather than there just being some guy in a mask, it's actually something very Lovecraftian and ancient that's trying to destroy their town. This has Sapphic elements. The main character is sort of a mashup between Daphne and Velma, but also not. It's a little hard to explain. But the main character is very clearly Sapphic, and she has a crush on one of the other gang members, the sort of Velma-y character. There are definitely Sapphic elements to this book, some Sapphic vibes. Not any like really in-your-face relationship stuff, so don't come for the romance, that's for sure. Cantero's writing style is just so strange and fun and absurd. I feel like he's not going to be for everyone. The way he writes is just in a way that's like octane. It wants to get your attention. It wants to keep your attention. It wants to do something unexpected or weird and just make you go like, what is happening? But in the best sort of way for me. I really loved this book. I thought it was cute and exactly what I needed and just fun and a really neat way to look at the old Scooby-Doo kind of formula. I highly recommend it. I highly recommend anything that Cantero writes, honestly. I read his other book, This Body's Not Big Enough for the Both of Us, and really enjoyed it as well. It could be good for spooky season. It's about a private detective, so you've got a little bit of a murder mystery going on there, but it doesn't really lean into the spooky vibes like this one does. Alright, that does it for my list. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have a good spooky season, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.